Good evening. Nice to see you. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and editors and all different people who are putting stuff out so you can get informed about what's really going on and what they're thinking about when they put stuff out. And in our second segment, we have just a wonderful, fascinating historical segment about culture in the borough of the Bronx. But right now, uh, the transportation reporter for WNYC and Gothamist is Stephen Nessen. First time on the show. Nice to see you, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm going to use two words. Some people think they're dirty words, but I'm going to say congestion pricing. It's upon us. I mean, barring some litigation that is going to challenge it, which is probably going to go on for years. So the MTA gave final approval. What are the MTA's hopes for putting congestion pricing in place in New York City?
Well, the big overarching goal is, of course, to reduce traffic in Manhattan, to reduce the number of vehicles that enter. You talk about pre-pandemic levels. Traffic is back much higher than it was before COVID, while subway and bus ridership is still, 30% below pre-pandemic levels. So first of all, the goal is to reduce traffic, of course. But according to state law, the MTA is required to bring in $1 billion a year on tolls from congestion pricing. And of course, as I'm sure your listeners are aware, the price tag is going to be $15 for most personal vehicles to enter the tolling zone between 5 a.m. and 9 p.m. And even on the weekends, it starts a little bit later. It's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And of course, trucks and big trucks are going to pay even more than that, $24 and $36 respectively. So, it's sort of a two-pronged goal to both decrease traffic, but also to raise, $1 billion a year for the MTA, which it will use to generate $15 billion worth of bonds. And
They claim, yes, the 15 billion they claim.
They're planning on it. Their financial plan is actually
Wow.
dependent on that. All the construction on whether it's signals, new train cars, even the Second Avenue subway extension and other big projects are all on pause right now until congestion pricing is finalized.
Wow. That is it's an extraordinarily ambitious plan. I'm going to speak as somebody in the Bronx who goes into Manhattan often. I am going to be emceeing a dinner on somewhere in May, and just below 60th Street in the evening. In the past, I probably might have taken my car. I mean, I'm pretty savvy. I know where I could park my car in Manhattan, but there's just no way that I'm going to go down and pay $15 to get downtown. Um, you mentioned something to me just beforehand, that there is mitigation money available for the borough of the Bronx. I wasn't aware of that. Explain what that is and how that might work, and will it help people like me or people, frankly, who are worse off than I am who want to come into Manhattan?
So the mitigation has to do with the environmental assessment that the MTA was required to do. So for
Ah,
years, they did this extensive study looking at, 20, I believe it's 28 surrounding counties, intersection by intersection, really honing in on
mhm.
what could happen if congestion pricing goes into effect. Will certain parts of the city, parts of New Jersey, parts of Connecticut even see some sort of bottleneck or increase in traffic that could have an adverse impact on the environment? That's environmental assessment. Assessment. They're assessing the environment. And while overall they found that traffic, this is going to help the environment pretty much overall across the board. But it's true in the Bronx, so-called environmental justice communities, which are communities that are already impacted with traffic, pollution from traffic,
Boy, I know that like I know my own name, my friend.
high asthma rates, as you know, and disproportionate access to medical care and all those things that contribute to environmental racism. Um, is part of that. So they looked at that, they studied that, and on the Cross Bronx Expressway, there is a slight increase in traffic, in truck traffic.
Wow.
Not
Wow.
enough that it would derail the plans, but enough that it raised concerns with the feds. So the MTA agreed to spend I believe it's $130 million on mitigation efforts. Some
Wow.
of that's going to include air purifiers for schools that are near the highway. Some of that's going to include a push to electrify the Hunts Point Market trucks, which are belching out a
Of
lot of
course.
carbon dioxide. They're going to
Well,
try to electrify them.
Steve, that's really helpful, and it's helpful to know for the people of the Bronx. One of the things, as soon as it was announced, as the plans were unfolding, people in the northernmost communities, let's say people in Woodlawn, people up in maybe Northwest Bronx and Riverdale, people in the more northern central Bronx up near Williams Bridge and those areas up there are very concerned that people from the northern, because we're of course connected to the northern suburbs, are going to park their cars in the Bronx somewhere. We lose not only all our parking spaces, but maybe we're going to all of a sudden get development instead of housing. We're going to get garages, et cetera, et cetera. So this money will go to some of those things. Do you think some of the private people who might be affected will get money? I mean, I wonder who's going to. I guess it's the council will determine how it's distributed.
Well, it's going to be the MTA that determines where that money goes.
Ah,
Part of it is in the discussion with the federal officials about how they're going to implement congestion pricing. But that concern about the concern from people who live outside of the tolling zone about drivers coming in from the suburbs is perhaps somewhat, a little bit of a wait and see. The MTA is not concerned about it. I've done interviews in Washington Heights, which is right next to the GW Bridge, and they have complained for years that New Jersey drivers cross the GW, park in their
right.
neighborhood, and take
And
the A
jump
train
in the
to
train.
the
Right.
city. So
Right.
they're really concerned about an uptick in that neighborhood. But again, the MTA says, according to their studies, their extensive modeling, that they just don't believe that is going to have, a material impact.
Yeah, you said that, and I smiled. I mean, we've all been around long enough to know. What's the objection, the most reasonable objection that you've heard? And I know you've studied this. Goodness, I was just looking within the last couple of weeks, like what, 3 articles, 4 articles. I mean, you're watching this every day. What do you hear that is most valid, maybe in terms of criticizing it, or are they all? It's because we don't know what it's really going to turn out.
Well, I think one of the most valid concerns is perhaps people who already pay a toll to enter the zone. There are several tunnels, the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel,
Right.
the Queens Midtown, and the Hugh Carey, where
Right.
drivers already pay a toll. And essentially, when they come out of that, they're right in the tolling zone. They're going to get
Yeah.
tolled again.
Right.
So,
Although that's a discounted toll, it may not be $15. It may be 12 or something like that, and you only
right.
get right. So they're saying the double toll, and of course, the state of New Jersey is suing New York City to because of this.
Yeah.
One of the things, and I mentioned to you, and I don't know if you saw it in the Daily News today. There's an op-ed piece about it impacting disabled people, which is very interesting because if in many cases, if you haven't put, the escalators and elevators in all the subway stations as planned, then how can we can't ride the trains? So you're really making it so we have to drive into Manhattan. That's to me among the many valid question marks.
Well, one of the sort of exemptions that is baked into the program is that vehicles that transport someone with a disability are exempt. So, but how is that going to work out is the big question. And the MTA hasn't released its information yet, but apparently, or according to the plan, anyways, drivers will have to apply, and you can have one vehicle per family with a disabled person in it. They can apply to get this exemption so that their vehicle, the family vehicle, whatever it is, can enter the tolling zone without paying.
What do they get? They get a tag on their plate or something like that, some other technical way of doing
And
it.
it's all digital, so they would know your plate. They would read your plate in the system and wouldn't charge you.
Right. You know, and that's another, I hadn't thought about this, but that's another thing, is your confidentiality. They can pretty much, I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, you're going across the Whitestone Bridge, you paid Easy Pass, we could figure out how to trace that. But all those cars will have a record of going into Manhattan. That's kind of interesting. I have to say, and one of the numbers I saw in the Daily News op-ed piece today is that the MTA has a legal commitment to make 95% of the subway stations accessible by, hold your breath, 2055. So I will likely not be, I would love to be around. I don't believe I'll be around to see that. And if I was unfortunate enough to live near one of the 5% that still didn't make it, I'm never going to see it. It's those kinds of things are kind of funny to me. I don't have a question with it. I just happen to notice that number. So this is happening, right? This is going to happen. And what is the date? July 1st?
Well, we say it's going to happen. The MTA, it wants to count on June 15th. But as you mentioned at the top, there are several lawsuits pending.
Right.
At least 6. There's a bundle of them in New York, and there's New Jersey, the state of New Jersey. Governor Phil Murphy himself is suing the federal government to block this from happening. And until those cases are resolved, we can't say with certainty that the MTA is going to flip the switch on June 15th and start tolling drivers.
This is the first city in the United States that's done it, but it's had apparent success elsewhere. I mean, and that's well documented. I mean, I haven't studied any of that. London, right? I forget, Sweden somewhere.
Stockholm, Singapore.
Stockholm. That's the other one I heard. Yeah.
You know, I did do an interview with one of the leading experts in Stockholm about it, and they had a very interesting way of going about it. They did it sort of as a trial run for half a year.
Okay.
And then they put it on the ballot. They made it a referendum.
Oh.
Should we continue doing it or not? And
yeah, that's not going to happen here.
No,
not unless there's a lawsuit requiring it.
But, you know, they found 2/3 of voters were against it before it went into effect. When they saw the decrease in traffic and how nice the streets were, 2/3 of voters voted to continue doing it.
Well, maybe we'll like it. I want to be optimistic. Listen, we didn't have time. We're running out of time here. But we got to ask about these autonomous vehicles and all the other things. Taxi dispatchers charged with taking bribes from cabbies at the airports. I guess you have a busy work schedule.
It's always busy. There's always something on the transit booth.
Somebody's driving in those streets right now. Listen, you're the best, Steve. Thank you so much, ladies and gents. Steve Nessen, who is the transportation reporter for WNYC Gothamist. Thank you for your expertise, your knowledge, and for sharing it with us on the Bronx Buzz.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Folks, we'll take a short break. And when we come back, as promised, a wonderful historical segment about our home borough, the Bronx. Don't go